Hello and welcome to my impromptu studio from which I'm going to deliver the fifth lecture in this cycle on Diaghilev and the Ballets Russes. And this lecture is going to be on Diaghilev's interaction with French culture. Now, of course, initially the idea behind the Russian seasons was to represent Russian culture, to sell it, to market it to Paris and beyond. But as years went by and even decades, Diaghilev's ties with Russia became weaker and weaker, especially after the revolution of 1917. So he found new friends, new partners, new patrons, which is very important. His company became much more cosmopolitan than before, even not all the dancers were Russian. So we will look at how the rich cultural landscape of France, of his host country, was feeding into what the Ballets Russes were producing. And my exhibit one is a very exciting piece. It's called L'après-midi d'un faune, the afternoon rest of a faun. And it's a ballet from 1912. But it's based on an existing piece of music by Claude Debussy, so great French impressionist. He was still alive at the time, but the piece dates from 1894. And moreover, it's based on a poem by the French symbolist, poet Stéphane Mallarmé, and the poem itself comes from even 20 years previous. And you can see here the illustrations to the first publication of 1876. It's the afternoon reveries of a faun who, as you can see, is looking through the reeds at the bathing nymphs. He feasts on grapes and recalls his pursuits of these charming nymphs. The language is very opaque. It's very difficult to follow what's actually going on, but it's more like word music. It's very enticing. And I've chosen one passage for you, which I think more or less makes sense, and even in translation, it's a great translation. So I'm going to read it out to you. And this is the faun speaking. Too bad. Others will lead me to happiness by their tresses, not to the horns upon my brow. You, my passion, know that purple and perfectly ripe, every pomegranate bursts open and murmurs with bees. And our blood, in love with whoever will seize it, flows for the whole eternal swarm of desire. So Debussy's piece is not following the plot of it, if there is any plot, in any detail. It's just presenting you the atmosphere, so it's very slow, it's very languorous. The themes are deliberately vague. It's all about the play of colors, which are kind of flowing into each other. And the pulse is almost imperceptible. So you lose the sense of time. And there is a little gesture towards the more concrete reality, and that's the sound of the flute that the faun is supposed to be playing, a reed pipe. So there are moments of agitation, portraying presumably his pursuits, but also this middle section with a slightly more palpable and so satisfying theme. The set was designed by Leon Bakst, who was designing quite a lot at that time for Diaghilev. You can see it's extremely beautiful, and it's almost like an abstract painting, because although you can see it's a grove and there are leaves and grass, but everything is flowing into each other like Debussy's piece. I think it's very much inspired by this musical impressionism as well. Now let's have a look at these costume designs, and you can see that they were influenced by Greek vases and also by those Egyptian and Assyrian frescoes that he was able to see in the Louvre. And it's an interesting thing that the design concept of figures being seen from the side, in profile, then becomes the main choreographical concept as well and influences Nijinski. But just to explain what you see on the right-hand side here on your screen, it's a figure of the faun in sexual ecstasy at the very end, after he has been playing with the nymph scarf, because that's the only thing that he's actually getting. So the choreography was produced by Nijinski, and it was Nijinski's first experiment. It was done in secret from Michel Fokine, who was at the time the main choreographer of the company. Although I can't really imagine how it could have been done in secret, because there were 90 rehearsals required for this 12-minute piece. Why so many? Yeah, because the concept was so novel, and I think Nijinski had quite a bit of difficulty to explaining to the dancers that they had to dance not to the music, but through the music, so to speak. In other words, the movement didn't quite try to reflect the music, to visualize it as it was doing in Fokine's choreographies. But on the contrary, it was moving in parallel or in counterpoint, so to speak. So that was quite a difficult thing. And the movements themselves were also very unusual. There was no convention to fall back on. Yeah, for the faun, they were very animalistic, and for the nymphs, they were kind of walking through the stage, but not to the music, and yet they had to do it in harmony with each other. Yeah. So what does it really look like? This is the backstage photo of Nijinski as faun, which of course is absolutely iconic. His very explicit costume, again, yeah, a whiff of scandal about that, and this incredible pose that he designed for his animal-like character. And I would like to show you now how it actually looks in real time. So through this wonderful reconstruction by Geoffrey Bally and Rudolf Nureyev as faun, you can almost imagine that you're seeing Nijinski, because Nureyev is just as strong a personality, and I think he's absolutely astonishing here, even if the quality might not be so good. But just have a look how this choreographical concept works in practice. So how did the audience receive this? Well, in the dress rehearsal, apparently there was no applause at the end. And who knows why that was? Maybe because they were scandalized by this final gesture, which is autoeroticist, and they didn't know what to do. But anyway, the manager, Gabriela Struck, came out on stage and said, let's watch it again. So they actually performed the whole ballet again, and then the reception was warmer. And the same thing happened at the premiere. It was performed twice, which is quite amazing to think. Yeah, so they were really thinking that this is such a modern, such an unusual, innovative piece of art that it has to be seen at least twice, so that you can start realizing that all these mismatches between movement and music are actually deliberate, and start appreciating this very particular beauty of this piece. Now we are actually going to do something similar. I'm going to show you two versions of the same scene, and this is the middle section of the piece, where I suppose the faun and the nymph are dancing a kind of pas de deux, a very strange pas de deux it is. But you will also see that although Nijinski actually recorded his choreography for this piece. But there are some elements of it which will remain the same in different productions, and others which will be different, which will be improvised around it. So it's very interesting to compare and see which one you like better. So that was a Russian production, and this is a German production from Bavaria. They're very different, aren't they? And I don't know, sometimes it seems that less is more, but that's just my own feeling about this. So Diaghilev actually felt that he had to elicit some positive responses from important artists who attended the performances. So he asked for letters from Odilon de Rodin, for example, the artist, and the sculptor Auguste Rodin. And you can see the quotes here that Rodin says, well, if Mallarmé had been alive, he would have loved that, which is, possibly a risky supposition. And Rodin says, well, I would like to sculpt Nijinski. He looks like such a picture. Yeah, it's amazing. And indeed, people were sculpting Nijinski, and this is a famous bust of him as a faun from 1913. So, I think you should definitely see the whole thing if you hadn't seen it before. It's a wonderful artifact of the 20th century that you can't miss. In my second chapter, we will talk briefly about the first ballet commissioned by Diaghilev from a French composer, so commissioned now, and that was Maurice Ravel. The commission came very early in 1909, but the ballet, which is Daphnis et Chloe, was premiered only in 1912. Yeah, so just a few days after L'Après-Midi. And in this picture, you see Nijinski and Ravel reading the score of Daphnis, which I think is a lovely image, reminding you that Nijinski actually was proficient at the piano, very musical. But Daphnis turned out to be an unhappy story. Ravel took too long over it, and Diaghilev got so annoyed when he couldn't have it even ready by 1911. And he actually produced a replacement Greek ballet. It seems just to spite Ravel. I think it was supposed to act as a kind of spoiler. And that ballet is Narcisse Echo, Narcisse and Echo, and it's based on Ovid's Metamorphoses, with the music by Nikolai Cherepnin, who of course was Diaghilev's staff composer. And Cherepnin had to write this score very quickly in the style of French Impressionism. And it seems to be that there's some kind of foul play going on, because he might have already seen the early print of Ravel's first version of the score, in the piano score. And he might have known various things that Ravel was doing. And basically he was imitating that work and preempting it and acting as a spoiler. See what you think. I will play you a little bit from Narcisse. It's just the music. We don't have the ballet, hasn't been preserved, but this is just the music, and it has this wordless chorus. And here is Ravel. What are the chances that Cherepnin didn't know about, that Ravel already had this idea of a wordless choir? Well, that's just my supposition, I guess. But the set as well, actually they had to use the set that was prepared for Daphnis for Narcisse, it seems, or at least, they are actually quite similar, as you can see, both by Bakst. And the costumes as well, these are for Daphnis and Chloe, these are for Narcisse. Of course, Nijinski was Narcisse himself, and this is a very beautiful picture of him. But nevertheless, the ballet actually wasn't successful. I'm talking about both, actually, in this case, because the true spoiler for Daphnis proved to be actually L'Après-Midi, which was premiered just before it. And Daphnis paled in comparison, because Fokkin's choreography already looked more familiar, and it was probably just one Greek ballet too many. But Narcisse also fell out of the repertoire. Much later, however, the choreographer Kasyan Galizovsky produced his own version of the choreography to Cherepnin's score. And I would like to share this with you, this clip that, strictly speaking, doesn't have much to do with the original Narcisse, apart from the music, but I just find this performance by Vladimir Vasilyev absolutely spectacular. I'm wondering actually whether this was influenced by L'Après-Midi as well. Yeah, his sort of preening gestures. He looks a little bit like Nijinski as Faun as well. Okay, on we go to our next chapter, and my third chapter is about another commission from a French composer, this time from Debussy himself. Even though Debussy disliked the choreography of L'Après-Midi, he agreed to write a new score, and the title of it is simply Jeux, Games. The inspiration for the idea came from a game of tennis that Diaghilev and Nijinski saw in Bedford Square in London. And Nijinski's original concept was that, this is how he described it, there should be no quarter ballet, no ensembles, no variations, no pas de deux, only boys and girls in flannels and rhythmic movements. He originally envisaged a tennis game being interrupted by the crashing of an aeroplane. Now, the aeroplane actually didn't make it to the final version, but it's very important. You will see why. The plot is also partly developing Diaghilev's private fantasy, portraying male homosexuality. But he couldn't do that on stage, so this was taboo. So it's replaced by a portrayal of two girls who also seems to be quite intimate with each other. And when we think of that, Marcel Proust did the same in his very famous novel, In Search of Lost Time, and it's very possible that he was actually influenced by Diaghilev's ballets. The scenario is minimal. The idea of games instead of traditional balletic numbers is actually similar to the Rite of Spring, because there are also quite a lot of numbers there that are also called jeux, games. Debussy described this scenario in the following way. In this scenario, there is a park, a tennis court, there is a chance meeting of two girls and a young man seeking a lost ball, a nocturnal mysterious landscape, and together with this, a suggestion of something sinister in the darkening shadows of night. So this very simple scenario prompted Debussy to also do something innovative, something they hadn't quite done before to this extent. It's a very unusually fluid score. It has more than 60 tempo markings, so it's a succession of brief musical moments. Some actually claim that this is just as innovative as the Rite of Spring, and you have to remember that they appeared together in 1913, side by side in the Diaghilev season. It's quite amazing to think of that. Debussy used to describe his music in various ways. For example, in 1907, he wrote to his publisher, "Music is not in essence a thing which can flow within a rigorous and traditional form. It is all about colors and a rhythmically organized time." So this is what we have in this piece, colors and rhythmically organized time, always changing. And there is also a nice quote on his own creative process during writing this piece. "Cinematography of instants through which the author moved while he was composing this piece." So we have to remember that this was the time when cinema was a very new medium and everyone was starting to think in those terms as well. So the connection with cinematography is another tie to modernity. The choreography, which was lost and reconstructed by Millicent Hodgson from very few sources. What do we know about the choreography? That it was based on athletic moves. Obviously, it's based on the game of tennis. There were a lot of symmetrical figures. There was a kind of succession of arrested poses. There was no fluidity. Again, the music is fluid, the movement is not. And it was danced on 3/4 point. So not on point, not off point, but on this sort of more graceful position. There is something I have to say specifically about the costumes. You can see that the costumes actually really not costumes at all. They are modern dress, not just modern dress, it's everyday dress. Yeah, Nijinski is wearing a red tie, but otherwise they're all in white. They were wearing kind of tennis clothes of the time. And that was an extremely innovative thing, yeah, to have that on the ballet stage. It was the ballet about 1913. It wasn't about some mythological past. So this very absence of costume, absence of historical distance was extremely striking. So you can see some backstage photographs. And this is the set again by Bakst. It's a reconstruction of the set by Bakst, which portrays this modern mansion and electric lights. Again, all the symbols of modernity. But the set is very dark, so if you imagine seeing white figures on that background, again, it looks very cinematic. Now let's see this reconstruction. I have to tell you that this is a very poor quality video. That's the only thing I could get my hands on. But it's just still amazing to see how it works in practice. Another little fragment that I would like to show you, it's all three of them dancing and forming these symmetrical shapes, including the climactic moment in Debussy's score, which actually coincides with a triple kiss. I find this mysterious ending over the empty stage with all of them disappearing incredibly evocative. It reminds me of, I don't know, of Antonioni's films from the 60s or something like that. So what was the reaction to all that? Well, here are some quotes. This is a quote from a review. "The new art of which Monsieur Nijinski is the prophet manages to turn even the insignificant to absurdity. What could be more ungraceful than the meaningless, pretentious contortions dreamt up by this nimble aesthete? It is said that Monsieur Nijinski's intention was to provide in this ballet an apologia in plastic terms for the man of 1913. If this is so, we have nothing to be proud of." And Debussy himself, "This fellow, Nijinski, adds up triple crotchets with his feet, checks them on his arms, then suddenly, half paralyzed, he stands crossly watching the music slip by." It's awful. It's even Dalcrozian. Remember Dalcroze, the inventor of rhythmic movement to music. For I consider Monsieur Dalcroze as one of the greatest enemies of music, and you can imagine what havoc his method can create in the head of a young savage like Nijinski. So, yes, the ballet was essentially a failure, and it didn't quite have the response because it was completely overshadowed by what was to come, even greater crime against grace, which was the Rite of Spring just a couple of weeks later. And compared to that, this to me looks very graceful. But I would like to underline again these important things about Jeux. It was the first ballet which was highlighting the idea of modernity through tennis, through the use of electric lights, through the idea of an aeroplane, which I said didn't make it, and also the idea of everyday, through the flannels and this lack of special costume. And the idea seems to have been expressed by Romola Nijinski quite well. Love becomes a game in the 20th century. So now we're going to fast forward to post-war time and meet the Diaghilev troupe in Monte Carlo at the famous casino in January 1924, where they performed a whole group of French pieces as part of the so-called Festival Français, French festival. And this was because after the various financial disasters, Diaghilev managed to find a new patron in the Prince of Monaco, and he was actually hoping to establish himself there permanently and run this annual festival and do opera as well as ballet. So this was the list of all the things that they did in January 1924. They're all French, and you can see quite a lot of them are actually operas rather than ballets for the first time since I don't know when. A lot of them are, the scores there are old 19th century or 18th century, but they are adapted by modern French composers, Poulenc, Milhaud, Auric, and Satie, and all of them belong to the group of, apart from Satie, who was their banner, I suppose, rather than a member, to this group of Les Six, the 6 composers that I have here in this picture. So the ballet that is more important in this group was called Les Biches. And the title is once again untranslatable, has been variously translated as the hinds, the does, the female deers, the darlings, and so on. So it's about a group of upper-class young women who are incredibly attractive and wearing these glamorous clothes and just sort of partying together and engaging again in some kind of amorous games. As Poulenc said himself, Francis Poulenc, the composer, there is no subject, just songs and dances. And the inspiration came from French culture of the 18th century, from the so-called Fête Galante, and this is a painting by Watteau, representing these similar amorous pursuits, but in the 18th century. So this is a modern version of that. So Poulenc actually made it into a sung ballet. He found some, as he described, mildly obscene 18th century texts. The sets and costumes were by Marie Laurencin, who was a contemporary French designer and painter. And the choreography was by Bronislava Nijinska, Nijinski's sister. She also danced in it, danced the hostess. And the ballet had spectacular success. So you can see there is a photograph here. This is one of the characters who is wearing this incredibly provocative, again, page boy dress. And you can see also that it was immortalized in a painting at the same time. This is how exciting this all seemed. And I would like to show you a reconstruction of this. You will see it has a very, very unusual, I guess, design concept here. It's all pink and blue, and there's this huge blue sofa, which, as some people described, is actually one of the characters of the ballet because so many things happen on it. Well, let's listen and watch. It's fun music, isn't it? It has everything in it as it was described from Bach to Offenbach, yeah, or we can say from Mozart to ragtime. And it's a kind of neoclassicism, yeah, with all the popular idioms mixed in. And it's very much based on what Stravinsky was doing at the time. So Poulenc and actually all of Les Six were incredibly enamored with Stravinsky's concept, which was at the same time modern and popular and commercially viable. So they were all doing very similar things. So let us look at another snatch from a different production where you can actually hear that the ballet is sung, and in that Poulenc is following the example of Les Noces, of Stravinsky's ballet from 1923. And another extract that I would like to show you, it's called Rag Mazurka. Yeah, so and in that name, you can see how this merging of different things is occurring. Yeah, you can hear the mazurka, you can also hear a kind of ragtime, and you can also see in the movements, in the choreography of Nijinski, this combination of traditional dance movements with these very modern dance movements that are being danced everywhere in the restaurants, in the music hall, on various sort of café concert stages and so on. Yeah, so it's really a great alignment again between the concept of the music and the concept of choreography. So, how was this received? This was a greatest success. All those operas by Gounod, they didn't actually have that much success, and Diaghilev never did opera ever again. But this ballet became successful, and here are some quotes from the critics. Yeah, so one of them says, talks about Poulenc combining Bach and Offenbach, Gounod, Wagner, and the Café Concert. From time to time, a gang of dissonant brass instruments interrupts a fugue in the best style as if to surprise the audience. It's a very curious sampling which becomes amusing once we have gotten used to it. And another one writing very similar things but about the choreography. Nijinski took advantage of classical figures, point-to-work pirouettes, entrechats, turns and lifts, and required only a slight change of balance, a barely perceptible deviation or twist to render upon the style abstract in its traditional perfection the curt and sporty attitude of elegance that is fashionable today. Yeah, so again, you have this wonderful harmony of music and movement. So, what can we say about this ballet as a whole? It really was portraying, as one critic says, women accustomed to Rolls-Royce and pearl necklaces. It made contemporary references, for example, to Coco Chanel's little black dress in that very provocative costumes that you've just seen. It was chic, it was about charm, it was about decadence. It was very Stravinsky in the musical style. And as a whole, it could be encapsulated in one very good term invented by Lynn Garofalo, which is lifestyle modernism. And this is really, Diaghilev found something new, something very exciting that the public loved. So it was a new successful concept. So he decided to go on with that. And 6 months later, we have another example of this lifestyle modernism ballet. And this is a ballet on the music of Darius Milhaud. This is the great Picasso curtain for it, which is probably the largest Picasso canvas in the world, made specifically for this ballet. So if in Les Biches you had this perfect harmony, synthesis between all the arts, in this ballet you have slightly more edgy combination of music, dance and design. And I think the edginess comes from the cubist set, which you can see on this picture, this changing booth, which looks a little bit crooked. So this is the ballet which is called Le Train Bleu, the Blue Train, and Jean Cocteau, which had the idea for this, came up with this bon mot. The first point about Le Train Bleu is that there is no blue train in it. This being the age of speed, it has already reached its destination and disembarked its passengers. So here there were even more contemporary reference and even more involvement with the celebrity culture through the designer, of course, first of all, who was Coco Chanel. So the curtain was by Picasso, the cubist set was Henri Laurens, the choreography was once again by Nijinski. And once again, this was a very successful ballet, and another bon mot that came from the critics that it was as difficult to get a ticket to the ballet as it was for the train itself. So Jean Cocteau, who actually became a kind of an artistic advisor to Diaghilev at the time, and their collaboration dates back actually to the ballet Parade in 1917, which I had already been talking about in another lecture. So Cocteau suggested again a sport-centered plot, and here you can have a parallel with Jeux, if you remember. After seeing the English dancer Patrick Healy-Kay, also known as Anton Dolin or Anton Dolin, practicing acrobatics in the interval. And there were further contemporary reference. For example, the golfer seems to have been inspired by actually Prince of Wales playing golf. Yeah, so it's really as high society as you can possibly imagine. And the figure of the tennis champion, the character of the tennis champion, was based also on the contemporary French tennis star who is seen here in quite a balletic jump herself. So there are some backstage photos that you can see. Another contemporary influence was the influence from exhibition dancers Marjorie Moss and Georges Fontana, who were dancing in various very upmarket hotels, such as the Savoy. And the lead dancer, who was at the time Diaghilev's favorite, Anton Dolin, he suggested to Diaghilev to go and see these dancers. So this dance by this couple also was imitated by the waltz in this particular ballet. So that's a whole host of contemporary connections. And a few words about Chanel and how did she come to collaborate with Diaghilev. She actually, this is very much a ballet about her scene because it's set in Deauville, where the train arrived to. And this was the place where Chanel opened her first boutique, selling deluxe casual clothing for leisure and sport made from tricot. And this was the material only formerly used for men's underwear. So it was a very novel use of it. So in 1920, she met Stravinsky and he stayed for a while in her Paris residence. And if you want to know about that, you have to see the big feature film that was made about that. And she actually guaranteed against loss the 1920 production of The Rite of Spring. So actually became one of the sponsors of Diaghilev's Ballets Russes. And from 1923, she also started to contributing her costume designs to Diaghilev productions. This is one of, I think it's artificially colored, but it's lovely to see these costumes in color. Now let us see how it what it all looks like when we're in movement. So to end, just a little vignette at the end, I would like to present something slightly different because there are quite a lot of these lifestyle modernist ballets and not everyone liked them. And some people thought that this trend in the company was kind of selling itself short and not as high art. It was a little bit too popular and possibly even vulgar. Certainly musically, people didn't feel it was quite as inspiring. But I just wanted to show you how with the same kind of music, which is very melodious and very easy to listen to, you can also do something else with design that can be much more edgy. And this is the ballet which is called La Chatte. It's from 1927. It's a scenario after an Aesop fable about a cat maiden. Yeah, so a young man falls in love with a cat, prays to Aphrodite to transform her into a woman, but then she is tested, a mouse is released, and this cat woman is so distracted that she runs after the mouse and is transformed back into a cat. And the unfortunate young man dies from disappointment. So it all ends with a funeral march. The music is by Henri Sauguet, which is now like a second, third rank composer. He's very much influenced by Satie, but less contrary in a sense, slightly maybe less interesting, but very, very pleasant to listen to. And the choreography is by Georges Balanchine, so that's also a very beautiful thing to watch. But I think the most important thing about this ballet is its design. The design is astonishing. It was actually built as architecture / sculpture. It's by Naum Gabot and Antoine Pevsner. Yeah, so Gabot, who was a Russian Jewish emigre to France, was already very famous by these objects that he made, which were neither architecture nor sculpture, but something in the middle. And he used all the most modern materials, the exciting materials, which were plastics, the transparent plastics. Now we hate plastics, but at the time this was absolutely cutting edge. And together with his brother, he produced this quite astonishing futuristic design and futuristic costumes. So this is a wonderful picture of Alicia Nikitina as La Chatte in her most exciting transparent hat. So let's have a look at how it worked in practice. And this is a little pas de deux. So you can see, the music is very sweet, the dance is very beautiful and graceful, but it's the design that is shocking and was shocking at the time. And this is how one critic described it. The shining, transparent armor worn by the dancers gave the ballet a heroic, interplanetary quality, as if the little tragedy was taking place in a society of godlike pioneers on a newly subjugated star. Well, let's draw some conclusions. So in the course of the 20 years that the Ballets Russes were present in Paris, Diaghilev engaged with very different aesthetic trends, from symbolism and impressionism to cutting-edge avant-garde and to more commercial forms of more modernism. He went from using just French topics and French music to commissioning music from French composers, and then towards the use of whole teams of French collaborators. So in the 20s in particular, he had to use a very different set of patrons. His ties with Russia were almost completely severed, and it was essentially a cosmopolitan company which in a sense could be more easily imitated. And this was the danger, that it was not unique anymore. And there was, for example, Ballet Suédois in Switzerland, which was a company that was doing similar adventurous things with ballet. So it seems that to some extent Diaghilev was losing his unique face. He had not commissioned anything from Stravinsky for many years. He commissioned the Pulcinella. That was the last thing, and that wasn't quite a score. It was just an arrangement, even though it was so incredibly influential. So although he hadn't commissioned from him, this neoclassical stroke popular trend was actually stemming from Stravinsky. So Diaghilev both lured Stravinsky into more cosmopolitan vein and then followed him there. But personally, his inner circle was still almost exclusively Russian, as his relationship with his French collaborators remained more distant. They were never like a family, like with his Russian collaborations earlier on. And he still suffered from nostalgia. He even considered going to the USSR, which proved to be impossible. But nostalgia for Russia. He also, I think, suffered from nostalgia for really great music, because ultimately you remember that he started as a musician, as a composer, and all this music that he was now using from the composers of Les Six didn't quite fulfill this brief of greatness that he was inspired by. So he was looking for art with a message. And this is a link to our next lecture, where we will see what came out of these longings. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you again through this screen next time for our final installment. Thank you very much, and bye.